The courthouse was strangely quiet that morning, as if even the building sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold. James Monroe, a decorated ex-soldier in his late 40s, sat on the cold wooden bench near the lobby window, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. His eyes, though hardened by years of military service, shimmered faintly with emotion as he gently rested his calloused hand on the head of his aging German shepherd, Max. Max wasn't just a dog. He had been James's partner, his protector, and, in many ways, his only family during his deployments. Together, they had completed multiple tours overseas, facing the horrors of war side by side. But now, after years of faithful service, Max was dying. Advanced cancer had spread through his body, and the vet had gently informed James that the most humane option was euthanasia. But James couldn't let Max go, not like that, not without closure, not without honor. So James had petitioned the court for something unusual, to bring Max into the courtroom one last time. The case itself was simple. James had filed a formal request to delay euthanasia for a few more days so Max could attend a public recognition ceremony, an unofficial but symbolic farewell. It was unprecedented. Most considered it unnecessary. But James believed that Max deserved a hero's goodbye. A bailiff approached him quietly and said, "Mr. Monroe, they're ready for you." James nodded, cleared his throat, and slowly stood. Max, despite his weakening frame, rose loyally beside him. The leash between them wasn't just a tether, it was a symbol of their bond, forged in fire and fear, trust and survival. As James and Max entered the courtroom, conversation ceased. Heads turned. Some people gasped softly at the sight of the elderly dog moving with such quiet dignity beside the soldier. Max's fur had grayed around the muzzle, and his eyes were slightly clouded, but there was still that unmistakable sharpness in his bearing, the trained discipline of a military canine. James walked with purpose but also with reverence. He knew this would be one of the last times Max would walk at his side. Every step felt sacred. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a reputation for fairness but also for pragmatism, looked over her glasses and took in the scene. She blinked a few times before adjusting her robe and saying, "Mr. Monroe, I see you've brought your companion." James stopped in front of the bench, his voice clear though his hands trembled slightly. "Your Honor, this is Max. He served with me in Afghanistan. He's a decorated war dog for commendations, including one for detecting an IED that could have killed 20 people. He's more than a dog. He's a soldier. He's my brother." There was silence. Even the court reporter paused momentarily. The judge looked down at the file in front of her, then back up at Max. "And you're requesting a delay in euthanasia? For a recognition ceremony?" "Yes, ma'am. Just 3 more days. There's a veterans group that's willing to host it. We've already arranged everything. I want him to go out with honor. He spent his whole life protecting people. He deserves to know he mattered." The judge studied James for a long moment. Then she looked at Max, who had calmly laid down beside James's boots, his tail thumping once against the floor. "Mr. Monroe, I'm not accustomed to granting requests of this nature," she said. "But sometimes the law has to make room for the human heart." She leaned forward and added, "Request granted." A breath seemed to escape from every person in the room. James swallowed hard, then looked down at Max. "Did you hear that, buddy?" he whispered. "We've got 3 more days." He didn't notice the tears slipping down his cheeks. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him. One held up a microphone and asked, "Mr. Monroe, why is this so important to you? It's just a dog, right?" James stopped, looked the reporter dead in the eye, and said quietly, "He pulled me out of a burning Humvee. Took shrapnel for me. Slept beside me every night in the desert. He didn't run when the shooting started. He's not just a dog. He's the reason I'm still alive." Max looked up at him as if he understood every word. They walked away from the cameras, away from the crowd. James took Max to the small park across from the courthouse. They sat together in the grass, and James pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a medal, a replica of the one Max had earned years ago. James pinned it gently to Max's collar and said, "You earned this more than anyone I know." Max licked his hand. That night, they slept in the living room, curled up on the floor just like they had during storms in the tent overseas. Max whimpered softly in his sleep, chasing distant memories of a life of service. James couldn't sleep. He lay there, watching his best friend breathe, counting each inhale like it was a blessing. The next morning, James woke early. The light filtering through the blinds painted golden bars across the carpet, and Max was still asleep, breathing slow and shallow. James made coffee and sat on the floor beside him, rubbing his ears gently like he used to after every patrol. For a moment, Everything felt peaceful, almost normal. But the weight in James's chest reminded him that time was short. He had a full day planned. They would visit the local Veterans Center, take a walk through the base where they had once trained, and end the day at a small gathering hosted by fellow soldiers, those who understood what Max had meant to their missions, to their survival, to their morale. When Max stirred, James smiled. "Rise and shine, soldier. Got a mission today." Max, ever the loyal partner, stood slowly, stretched with some stiffness, and followed James to the car. James had prepared the back seat with a thick blanket and placed Max's old unit patch beside him. The dog laid down, his head resting next to the insignia, as if remembering the old days. The drive to the Veterans Center was quiet. James glanced in the rearview mirror frequently, watching Max with the same protective instinct that Max had shown him for years. When they arrived, a small group of retired soldiers was already waiting. One by one, they came up, crouched down, and offered Max slow, respectful pats and words of gratitude. "He saved me during that convoy ambush," said one gray-haired Marine, his voice thick with emotion. "Without embarking when he did, I wouldn't be here." Another added, "He was more alert than any of us, and more loyal than most people I know." Max sat patiently, taking in the love and attention with calm eyes. He didn't wag his tail much anymore, too tired, but his eyes sparkled faintly. He knew these men. He remembered. They shared stories, some of them hilarious, others too painful to finish. They laughed, cried, and raised a toast of black coffee in his honor. A young staff member from the center took photos, and someone had even made a banner that read, "Thank you, Max, hero, soldier, friend." Afterward, James and Max returned to the base where they had trained together nearly a decade earlier. Most of the buildings were the same, the smells, the echoes of marching boots. James parked near the old obstacle course and carried Max out, placing him gently on the grass. "You remember this?" James asked. "You beat me through that tunnel every damn time." He chuckled, though his throat ached. Max nudged the dirt with his nose, then looked up at James with something deep in his expression, acknowledgement, maybe even pride. They sat there a long time, James leaning against a fence post, Max curled at his feet. The wind rustled the trees above them like a memory trying to speak. Later, at the evening gathering, a small room in the American Legion Hall was filled with people who had known Max or heard about him. Photos from their deployments were displayed across a long table, Max in his vest, Max beside James during a patrol, Max curled up beside wounded soldiers, eyes always alert. James stood at the front, Max lying beside him on a soft pad. He cleared his throat. "Most people don't understand what it's like to go to war," he began. "Even fewer understand what it's like to do it with a dog who loves you more than his own safety." He paused, looking down at Max. Max didn't sign up for this. He didn't choose the danger, the bombs, the fear. But he never flinched. He never hesitated. He ran into fire for me. More than once. He looked up again, his voice trembling. And when I came home broken, not even sure who I was anymore, he was still there. He didn't care about my nightmares, my silence, my scars. He just stayed. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. James kneeled beside Max and whispered, "I don't know how to say goodbye, so I won't. You're with me. Always." The room was silent. Then, from the back, someone began to clap. Slowly, the others joined in. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was reverent. James scooped Max up gently and carried him out as the applause followed them. Outside, the stars were starting to show. James placed Max in the car once more and drove home under the darkening sky, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Max's back. That night, Max was more restless. He paced a little, whimpered now and then, and even barked softly in his sleep. James stayed up, watching over him, whispering old commands, offering treats he no longer wanted. He knew they were almost out of time, but somehow, the day had felt right. It had honored Max not just as a soldier, but as a soul. The sun rose slowly the next morning, casting a pale light through the blinds. James had fallen asleep on the floor next to Max, his hand resting gently on the dog's side. Max was still breathing, but it was shallow, irregular. Each inhale came with a slight hitch, like his body was trying to hold on just a little longer. James stirred, sat up, and blinked at the quiet room. There was no alarm clock, no sounds of cars outside, just the low hum of a world holding its breath. He didn't need anyone to tell him. He knew today was the day. The ceremony had been planned for noon, a symbolic military send-off in the park behind the Veterans Center. Word had spread after the courtroom appearance in the news coverage. Dozens of people had RSVP'd. Vets, families, old handlers, local officials, even kids who had written letters to Max after reading about him. But James wasn't sure Max would make it that long. He knelt beside him and whispered, "Hey, buddy, we've got one more thing to do. I promise it'll be quick. Just a little more, and then you can rest." Max's ears twitched slightly, his eyes barely opened. But when James picked up the leash, something shifted. Max stirred, pulled himself slowly to his feet. It was as if hearing his partner's voice summoned every last ounce of strength in him. James smiled, but his heart was breaking. Attaboy. They took the drive one last time. This time, the street to the park was lined with people. Some saluted, some clapped gently, others just stood with their hands over their hearts. The news had done its job, and Max had become more than just James's story. He had become a symbol. At the center of the park, a small platform had been set up. American flags flanked the sides, and a folded triangle flag rested on a table covered in black velvet. James carried Max up the few steps himself, his arms trembling under the weight, not just of the dog, but of the moment. He laid Max gently on the pad that had been prepared for him. A military chaplain stepped forward. "We gather here not to mourn a death, but to honor a life of loyalty, courage, and silent service." James stood next to him, his hand resting on Max's side. The chaplain continued, speaking of sacrifice, duty, and love that transcended species. He recited passages about guardianship and brotherhood, about the unspoken promise between a handler and his dog. Then, one by one, fellow soldiers stepped up and shared their memories. Some were lighthearted, stories of Max stealing food or barking at the wrong moment. Others were heavy, tales of how Max's instincts had saved entire squads. James didn't think he'd speak again, but when the mic was offered, his feet moved before he could decide. He stood before the crowd and looked down at Max, then out at the sea of faces. "When we first met, he bit me." A soft laugh rolled through the crowd. I was cocky. He wasn't impressed. It took weeks before he'd even listen to me. But when he did, we became one unit, one mind. He didn't just follow orders, he anticipated them. He knew when I was afraid, when I was angry, when I was about to break. And he stood between me and the world every damn time. James paused, his throat tight. "I've lost friends in combat. I've buried brothers. But this is different. This is saying goodbye to the only living thing that ever saw all of me and never flinched." He knelt, kissed Max's forehead, and whispered, "It's okay now. You did good. You can rest." A trumpet played taps in the background. The sound cut through the stillness like a soft goodbye echoing through the soul. Some people cried openly. Others simply held their breath. As the ceremony ended, James stood, scooped Max into his arms one last time, and carried him to the waiting car. The plan was to take him to the vet that afternoon, to let him go peacefully, surrounded by love. But Max didn't wait. As James drove slowly back through the streets, Max shifted once in the backseat, took a long, slow breath, and then simply stopped. No struggle, no sound, just silence. James pulled over, parked, and sat there for what felt like an hour, his head bowed, hands on the wheel, tears silently tracing lines down his face. "I'm so damn proud of you," he whispered. He climbed into the back seat and sat beside Max, cradling him the way one would cradle a child. Cars passed, people walked by, but James didn't see them. All he saw was the life that had stood beside him through war and pain, joy and fear. When he finally drove home, it was dark. He carried Max inside, wrapped him gently in the flag that had been folded for him. He laid him on the same pad where they'd spent the last night together. Then he sat beside him, in uniform, and stayed there until morning. The next morning was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel peaceful, but hollow. James didn't bother making coffee. He didn't turn on the lights. He just sat in the armchair near the window, staring at the bundle on the floor wrapped in the folded American flag. Max looked like he was sleeping, just taking one of his usual long naps after a hard mission. But James knew better. He had already made the arrangements. A local animal cremation service, used to working with police K-9 units, would arrive in an hour. They had agreed to handle Max's remains with full honors. But James couldn't bear the idea of handing him over, of letting go. A knock at the door broke the silence. He opened it to find a young woman standing there. She wore a navy blue jacket with a veterans support group patch on the sleeve. Behind her stood a man in a suit holding a clipboard. "Mr. Monroe?" she asked gently. James nodded. "We just wanted to stop by and deliver something. The story of you and Max has touched a lot of people. Several people wanted you to have this." She handed him an envelope. James opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note for Max, for all the Maxes who served silently, and for the soldiers who came home with nothing but their dogs. This is for them, too. Beneath it was a certified check, enough to cover Max's final arrangements, and then some. James choked back emotion. I don't know who. They didn't want to be named. Just said you'd understand. He nodded again, unable to speak. When the cremation team arrived, James insisted on helping carry Max to the vehicle. He didn't want anyone else touching him, not for the last time. They draped the American flag over the stretcher. As they lifted him, James gave a final salute. The weeks that followed were a blur. He went through the motions, answered emails, took calls from strangers who had seen the story and wanted to thank him, sent out thank you cards to the men and women who had attended the ceremony. But inside, he felt empty. One evening, he received a package. No return address. Inside was a framed painting of Max, regal, alert, wearing his military vest with a proud stance. The background was a desert sunset, orange and golden hues that made Max's fur look almost luminous. Taped to the back was a note. Some heroes wear boots. Others wear paws. He hung it above the fireplace. As the days turned into months, James began volunteering at the local VA hospital. He started small, talking with patients, bringing coffee, sitting with men who didn't want to talk, but didn't want to be alone either. They all knew who he was. Most didn't say anything. Some simply nodded with a quiet respect that needed no words. One afternoon, an older veteran in a wheelchair rolled up beside him and said, I had a dog like that once. Came back from Vietnam. Only thing that kept me sane. James smiled softly. Yeah, me too. The man grinned. Ever think about getting another one? James hesitated. It wouldn't be the same. No, it wouldn't, the man agreed. But maybe that's okay. Later that week, the VA director called James into his office. We're starting a therapy dog program, he said. Veterans working with rescue dogs. It helps both sides. You've got the experience and the story. Want to lead it? James didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the flag waving in the breeze. Then he looked down at the patch on his jacket, the one Max used to wear. I'll do it, he said. For him. The first dog he trained was a scared, skinny German Shepherd mix named Shadow. Shadow had been found abandoned in a warehouse, malnourished and fearful of loud noises. It took weeks of patient work, soft commands, slow movements, long hours just sitting together in silence. But gradually, Shadow began to trust. He started walking beside James, tail held a little higher each day. One morning, as they walked through the hospital corridors together, a patient in a room reached out a hand. Shadow hesitated, then moved forward and licked the man's fingers. James felt a familiar warmth in his chest. Max was gone, but his legacy wasn't. He saw it in the way Shadow stood tall, in the way the other veterans responded to him, in the quiet moments when someone who hadn't spoken in weeks reached out to pet a dog and whispered, "Good boy." James still visited the park sometimes. The bench where he and Max had sat remained the same. Someone had added a plaque that read, "In honor of Max, war hero, loyal companion, beloved friend." He'd sit there with Shadow by his side, watching the sunset the way he and Max used to. And in those moments, when the wind moved just right and the world seemed to pause, he could almost hear those steady paws again, walking beside him. Always beside him,